We're going to talk a little bit about yield saver and yield saver best practices, and we're really going to just start with why we yield saver. And there's a lot of different ideas around yield saver as, boy, I really need yield saver, or I don't really think I'm losing head loss, or I have a head that doesn't really shell, or there's a lot of different theories around whether I need it or whether I don't need it. And so just to get back to really what we have seen as far as head loss. And so what we do know is that you can't make an assumption that 23% corn, we don't use head loss, that we don't have significant head loss. We also can't say that for sure at 15% corn that we definitely will have head loss. It depends a lot about the specific hybrid, the environment that hybrid went through, potentially of those different things. We'll see certain hybrids one year have that. We have some people call that are still saying, boy, I'm still getting a lot of head shelling with yield saver. And really what we've diagnosed that down to is it's still an impact point. We've cushioned that impact point, but we've made it much better. So as we start looking at these things, there's just a lot of different things. Whenever a grower says to me, boy, I don't think I'm losing any, I certainly believe everything he's telling me. Or there's other times where growers are saying, man, I'm losing 4.5 to 8 bushel. And there's really just nothing I can do. So it's really an extreme. What we know is year in, year out, we can save kernels throughout the duration of harvest. And so when you look at this picture here, this is really what it's all about. It's about saving those kernels. It's really all about the cushion. And then secondary to the cushion is really the ability to capture that. So we're going to talk a little bit about wear here. That's a very common question. To what degree, as my brushes start to wear back, how does that affect my savings? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. There is a best practices card that goes with this, and it's a very important card that we built just to help understand how to best look at a head. I look at it very much so if I'm taking my truck in and I'm getting new tires on it, my desire is to get the most out of those tires. So typically they'll ask me, do I want it aligned? Do we want to check for structure underneath the front to make sure everything's in good shape to basically maximize what we're trying to invest in? And so yield saver is very much that same way as we start looking at it. And we're really going to just dive through just the things as growers and dealers look at these corn heads, as they kind of go through a checkoff list and say, hey, this is something we need to address, or boy, you know what, we don't need to address this because we've got it exactly the way that we need it to be. And so that's really what the goal of today is to really just look at that. So you'll see here just preparation prior to harvest. And so we've seen a lot of different things. As we go out to heads, in some cases yield savers are going on to brand new heads. In a lot of cases, yield saver are going on a head that has already went through its first set of chains, or maybe its second set of chains. So just like I remember riding motorcycle for many years, and when we would replace a chain, we would typically replace the sprockets. We knew the two were kind of married. They ran there together. They wore in together. And so a lot of times when chains have ran their course, I would certainly make sure that you take the manufacturer recommendation on whether those sprockets are something that we want to move forward with, or is that something that we need to replace, similar to the alignment on a pickup. So as we start looking at that, that's one thing, just preparation to harvest. Another one, if you've put on a slowdown kit, we really want you to get back to the original sprockets that you ran. One of the goals with yield saver, and we'll talk a little bit, is a matching of head to ground speed. And matching that and running things in unison reduces friction, it reduces residue intake. Actually, many combine technicians will tell me that they like the idea of a yield saver on a head because it allows growers to now run the head at the speed that it was meant to, and not in an area that it's lugging down because we're trying to slow it down. And so those are just some things prior to that inspection of the deck plates. We're going to open our deck plates about 3/8, a quarter, really probably to a 1/2 inch greater than what you would run on standard and gathering chains. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But Here's chains that have ran a year, was out last year. We spent a lot of time looking at sprockets and chains and chain wear, and the roller bearings and everything that goes with that. And it was day and night difference of just the chain over a period of time when we had sprockets that were in good condition. So this picture is a picture of sprockets that are in good shape. And then as we look here, you'll see these both had yield saver on them as well. Yield saver is actually still on the one on the left. As we popped the snout off, not only did we have some infrastructure that was missing, but we also had just wear around the sprocket. And there was no doubt that we could definitely tell long-term just that chain. And these aren't really things that are any different than standard gathering chains, but just something to look at that we've noticed. We want growers to get maximum use out of their chains. We want them to get maximum use out of their yield savers. So it's important as you do that preparation just to really understand what we're looking for. So that's one thing. You want to pop the snoots up, you know, and start inspecting that head and really looking at this prior to installation. So one other thing that we really want to look at, and this is really, you might say, boy, I don't know what these pictures are. I'm not as familiar with this. Maybe you work more with red heads or something like that, or with, you know, 600 series previous to 2012, or maybe a 4090 series. But this is one area that we want to pay attention to if we have a 600 series that's 2012 or newer. Basically, it's you'll see here in the picture, I guess you can see it in the center one. This is the 6-tooth sprocket, which pretty easily signifies the year of the head being 2012 and newer. And so there's those poly guides that you're kind of seeing, and you can kind of see across the picture that there's a warping effect that's pushing them in. And you can see in the center just the row there that we're looking at, and then you can see on the very right what it looks like when it has yield saver on it. So when you look at yield saver, you can see those bristles almost pushing themselves all the way to the block on the other side. So we're making it very tight. So if I were to try to take my fingers and shove down in there, we would struggle to be able to really get through there, which is quite a bit different of a feel than when we have chain guides that are not warped. And so here in this next picture, we spent a lot of time here a while back on the test stand. And so we would set up heads as bad as we could set them up. And then we would see what we would get in for residue. And then we would come and go to the other extreme, and we would set them up as good as we could set them up. And we would run stocks through them. And so this is wet corn. This corn is plus 30% that we were doing that day, because we tend to get more residue in the wetter the corn is. So we're like, well, let's just look at it at that point. So you can see here on the right, as that stock roll starts to pull down, we embrace around that stock more significantly than we really want to when we have those chains guys pushing. And one sure tale is you can see the tighteners up there on both sides. And typically that chain guide is pretty much right up against those. And so we're pushing in close to an inch harder than what we would want to when you start looking at both sides. So the question is, what does this look like if we don't have warp chain guides? How much of a difference does it make? So another inspection point to really look at. So this is a head here that has ran some acres. This is actually a picture that is not on our test stand. This is a picture out in the field that we took pictures of. Chain guides off 600 new. You can see the chain guides rest up right against the tighteners. And I put that picture in, but basically when we did that on the test stand, significantly different amount of residue that came up into the head. And so just being able to have that to where we can come through, and instead of bear hugging that stock because we're pinching everything together, we are basically just creating a little bit of a surrounding to where that plant can still be pulled down through very, very nicely. So the next big component of this is stock rolls. And so I want to have a nice, really share a conversation with you about stock rolls. And I certainly don't want us to swing the pendulum right or left, or I just want to help you understand what that stock feels like when it's going down. So basically, Yield Saver does not bear hug the stock. So if you don't have stock rolls on and you do have Yield Saver on and you put a stock in the Yield Saver, it would hold it. But you could easily take 2 fingers and pull it through. Versus if you didn't have it on, Yield Saver on, it would just drop right through. And so small amount of friction basically is what we're doing to capture and cushion and do the things that we're doing. But the one thing we have to do is we have to have stock rolls that have the ability to well overcome anything like that. Some people will call it a little bit of a tug of war. I don't want to act like, you know, this is a huge tug of war. This is a slight friction. It's a headwind of about 5 miles an hour when you're riding your bike. So what you're going to see is chain roll here on the left, and just visualize a stock coming down in there, and we're grabbing that thing, and we are not letting go of it. There's no flutter, there's no hesitation, there's nothing that goes with that stock roll. Now you can look at like intermeshing rolls. John Deere has an intermeshing roll that is also significantly more aggressive than their opposed rolls. We've had very good success with chain roll. We've had very good success with intermeshing rolls. In fact, we've had very good success with opposed rolls that you're going to see on the right. But the one thing that we want to see is as these rolls start to wear, and I'm speaking more to the one on the right, as they start to wear, we struggle to get that clean, aggressive pull. It almost becomes more unpredictable. And so it's very important as you guys look at growers, you evaluate their heads, just really imagine what that pull would feel like to come through. Again, it's not a 40-mile-an-hour headwind, it's a 5-mile-an-hour headwind. It's what we have to do to basically add up those kernels to give that grower that additional $4 to $6 to $8 an acre in his pocket by having those kernels in the tank versus having those kernels in the field. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go. So you can kind of see here in a picture, this is kind of looking down on the guts of a chain roll, and imagine what that stock would feel like versus the bottom of an opposed roll that has some wear on it. So as you have growers that start to look at different heads and putting Yield Saver on, just an inspection of those rolls. In a lot of cases, rolls are, if they need to be updated, we would make the recommendation that we look at a chain roll type of technology or a intermeshing type of technology that isn't more of a pinching roll, but just more of a grabbing roll that really adds more aggression to be able to get that roll down through. So let's talk a little bit about deck plates. Obviously, we've got our stock rolls running underneath there. A lot of people think that the brushes in and of themselves are going to really stop that and break that. But what we see, it's similar to like NASCAR or something like that. After the years of when Dale Earnhardt got killed and hit that wall, there's been a big push to safer barriers, and we are a safer barrier, so to speak. So as that comes down, instead of really high G-force, high impact, we are embracing that impact for that ear to be able to come down, have a very slight reduction of impact so that we just affect what those kernels on the butt of that ear feel. So they are still going to get down to that deck plate in most situations. Certainly not as hard on that deck plate. The reason we open it a 1/4 to 3/8 is really a residue. We now have the brushes there. Opening them just helps the stock rolls have a little bit of a cleaner roll through. We still do everything from a saving. Some people open them, boy, can I open them wide open? Absolutely not. Deck plate management is still an important part of the combine head. And so we still want you to be able to do the things that you've done there. So let's look at the impact of an ear on Yield Saver. And so again, this is pretty wet corn. And so as we look at this ear coming down and it's going through those bristles and it's getting pulled down by the stock roll, it is still going to compress those bristles. And you can imagine about 30 to 40 of these ears coming in this row a second and coming down and rolling into the corn head. And so you can see this is in the circle is where the impact was made. And what we're seeing is a significantly more impact. If the corn is wet, we're potentially smashing that. It's going to come off, it's going to grind off and basically get blown out of the back of the combine as chaff. As it gets drier, that's where we start to see the explosion. So the reason I put this up is the deck plate management is important. Slightly open them up a little bit beyond what you're doing. It helps with residue, but to open them significantly is not necessarily where we want you to go as well. So it's just understanding what that ear is still feeling when it comes down. It's more like getting hit in the head with a helmet on versus getting hit in the head without a helmet on. And really what Yield Saver is it's a helmet when it comes to that contact. One of the most important things that I just can't say enough about is the head to ground speed conversation. Different parts of the country feel different ways, different growers feel different ways. There's growers that I have to really beg to slow their head down, and there's growers that we have to really beg to speed their head up. Both of those make it challenging for Yield Saver. And what I mean for challenging, running too slow adds residue. It takes away some of the savings. And it also really is probably the worst thing you can do from premature brush wear, because we're pushing on the brushes just the opposite that we would want to. So this is a chart. A guy's running, 4 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour. He's going to be somewhere in that 600 to 620 range. Growers are going to feel that speed. Some growers are saying, boy, I don't want to run that fast. But really, as I talk to technicians, that's really where the head is designed to run in those situations. Everything's in unison. There's less lugs. There's just a lot of things that are running in unison, which is actually helps with the longevity of that corn head. And so we're going to look at a few pictures here of what it feels like to run right within that range. And we're going to look at a few pictures that what it feels wrong. So if you go out to a head and you see something, my hope is here that you'll get a little bit of a feel for maybe what you're starting to look at. So this is a head here that ran last year. You can see it's got the crop lug that we had last year out, and this is at 100 acres. And so this grower, 6-row head, 600 acres, ran that RPM right around 600, ran 3.7 to 4.2, and you can see the brushes are still touching, and they're still doing a tremendous job, well as it goes into the 125 acres, probably even up to the 150 acres. You can just visualize the cushion, the helmet, so to speak, that's taking the impact instead of the head or the butt of that ear. We're still looking really, really good. So here's another picture. This is the 12-row head at 1,100 acres, so roughly just shy of 100 acres per row. This grower was very pleased with the wear. 120 acres of that 1,100 was down. Those brushes were running in the dirt. And so there's still a tremendous amount of savings that goes on right there with that head. I would tell you, if you want to know how tough these bristles are, take a side cutters and see how many you can cut at one time. I had a side cutters that I had with me for the last 20 years that I ruined in about 3 snips. I thought I could cut maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 at one time, and it ended up being 1 or 2. So the bristles are, even though they maybe feel they're deceiving when you put your hands down through and you think, boy, how tough are these? But a very specific type of material that adds to just the longevity of all those ears. Again, these rows are taken down about 30 to 40 ears per second over the lifetime. That's just an awful lot of stocks that are pulled through there. More than that, there's just an awful lot of cushioning that goes on to save kernels. So this is one thing here that I just wanted to share. This is a picture. The left picture here is the iconic picture of running your head too slow. You'll start to see where I've got the arrow there. It's starting to bow or kind of rainbow around it. It almost looks like the hair is thinning on the brushes. So the brushes are designed to bring stuff up. There's an angle on them and everything that goes with that. When you run it too slow, you're basically pushing the opposite side the brush was never intended to be pushed on. And so if you're going to err on one side or the other, a slightly too fast is better than slightly too slow. So we went out to this grower, and everything's just out of whack when you're running it significantly too slow. And we were losing corn, and it was not looking the way Yield Saver fields should look. The right picture is the exact same head, 104 acres. And I should have probably gotten more close up with this so you can kind of see, but we did not, once we got the head sped up, we had significantly more savings. We had significantly better brush life, and we had less residue. Not rocket science. Utilize that chart. Growers get that feel for that and just bring it in. So the one thing I want to talk about is really all the pictures that you've seen so far in this presentation were, you saw a lot of green paint. We have a solution for 4090, 600 pre-12, 600 post-12. We also have solutions for a lot of other heads. And so the one thing I want to talk about today, just for a few minutes, is there are a significant amount of heads on the market right now that have a smaller pulley on the top and a larger pulley on the bottom, or sprocket, I'm sorry. So it's kind of a tapered effect. So when you put our yield savers on, they're going to be tighter at the bottom, and there may be a slight gap at the top, even when they're brand new. And it's just the way that they were designed to bring up. You're looking at a 2612 Case IH head here. It's a 30 millimeter chain. You can see it's a smaller chain, and it's coming up through there. And so on some heads, I know like some of the Drago ones, there's some adjustment to where these sprockets are on the bottom. And some individuals just to kind of to help with the case, doesn't necessarily have to, but they're able to adjust those slightly to bring those out just to make it not so tight on the bottom. When you look at like a Drago GT, the brand new version, they continue to smash that really, really tight at the bottom, tighter than they do on their previous series. The Drago GT, we will not be able to be on the Yield Saver because they've smashed that so tight. So those are the things that we look at in engineering, is saying, you know, what is that push? Is there adjustment? If not, you'll see on this head, this is a head that ran 2,700 acres roughly on these 12 rows, and this grower is going to go ahead and utilize this next year. As you get into those heads, you know, a lot of interest in Capella, a lot of interest in Lexion. Again, that's all this area of different sprockets. And if we have enough room at the bottom, we've had a very good success with them. We do look at clearance issues and all those types of things, so we continue to look at other heads. But I just wanted to point that out. Gearinghoff, Drago, there's multiple case heads that have this difference. So one thing I want to talk about now is just savings and what wear is and what worn is and what worn out is. And so this is a chart that's on the bottom of the Yield Saver card, the best practices card. And this I truly believe with all my heart that this is really close to what it is. We look at it and we watch it and we see it, and so much of what we do is the helmet effect. We're taking the impact on the football field with a helmet on instead of head-to-head contact. And so even though that helmet over time may get a little bit thinner, it's certainly much more protective of the butt of that ear than it is when it's not. And so a lot of people, you know, look over time as, you know, okay, I get to 100 acres, 125 acres, I have no savings left. So if I didn't pay for them or more than pay for them at 100 acres, that means I'm done. And I think for the most cases, you guys are seeing that. But again, this is just a chart that I wanted to make sure that I shared with you as well. So we're really happy, even as we start to gap, just at the ability to save at a high level. And really, it's a lot about cushion. Even when we're wore back a little bit, we still have a stock in there with some residue. And the key is to not let the kernels get off the ear. We certainly have a capture effect, but we win when we don't let kernels get off the ear. So here in this next one, again, I already alluded to that, so I'm going to jump through this, but just the ability to understand that there are different sprockets. We do know about the different sprockets. We continue to measure and understand, and some heads are adjustable as we look at that. So the one other thing here, really, one of the last slides here is chopping corn heads. We get a lot of questions about chopping corn heads. and what is our success on chopping corn heads, or do we work on chopping corn heads? And I would tell you that every chopping corn head that we're under, based on color or brand, they have their knives at a different spot. And a lot of people will say, well, I have choppers, so it's not that important that I have good stock rolls because I'm chopping it up anyway. But when it comes to yield saver, we really don't care if the choppers are underneath there. We care about the stock rolls bringing it down through and having the head work the way it wants to work. As you guys are evaluating heads for stock rolls or heads with choppers, when you look at the deer one, which is in the upper left, it's got probably the blade up as far as possible. So it's making that initial cut, as you can see in the picture, as it's coming into the gathering flutes. And so we want it to, for a short period of time, it's going to almost float until it engages as it pulls down. So we really need those front of those stock rolls on a chopping corn head to be equally or maybe even better than we would without choppers, especially on that series. When you look at the next one beside it, which is a case, that's a 2612 picture. You can see that in this case, the stock is going to just get into the stock rolls prior to it being cut. When you look at the Drago on the bottom, the mower blades aren't really doing much until that stock is almost down through the stock rolls. So just looking at chopping corn heads, certainly stay with the exact same best practices that you have, whether it's chopping or not chopping, because the plant does not know any different, whether it does or does not have that. So another question that we get a lot is we'll get a call into product support and say, do you realize that we have a rub? The picture on the left is a 2612. The picture on the right is a 608 deer. And so we understand that as we come on heads and as we go through not only series of heads, but years of series of heads, that manufacturers will make slight differences, and they make those slight differences for all the right reasons. But just because you're a 2012 plus 600 series head doesn't mean that you may not have a different bracket than on a 14 than you do on a 50. And so we've looked at so you can see here on the 2612, as that thing comes down to make its backstroke, you can fit maybe a Sharpie in there between the steel crop lug and the obstruction. And that's kind of my measure. If you can stick a small Sharpie in there, the brushes are still going to turn. The nice thing is the brushes are getting pressure the way they were intended to get pressure. And you'll see on that head, this is the same head that I showed you just briefly, that had roughly 270 acres per row on. And so we don't want the rub right up against the crop lug, but if we can fit our finger between there or almost a Sharpie, and the bristles are going in the direction that we want them to grow in, we are not seeing any type of significant wear. So just know that. This is, if you're sitting in the combine, this would be the far right outside row. The green paint that you're seeing there would actually be the half snoot, would be the very outside as it comes around. We're having a little bit of rub there, which is not uncommon. So those are just some things that as you're looking at things or installing things, just understand that we understand that, we know that. So just here in conclusion here, this is my third to the last slide. On that day on the stand, I did everything wrong in 1, I did everything right in 3. And there are certain situations where you might end up somewhere between 2 and 3 with residue. But we definitely don't, if we see the type of residue in number 1, we know there's something on that head that's not right. And so just encourage you guys to go through the things we talked about, go through the best practices. We have done our homework to make this thing do exactly what we want it to do to the very best of our ability. Last here, this is a head that's running, and this is a head that we had gotten some calls on. This head is half yield saver, it's half standard gathering chains. And if you look at this, you could analyze it for maybe a minute or two, and you could guess which side has more and which side has less, which side yield saver, which side is not. But after Matt Foes went out and really dug into it and understood why we were having some of those situations, we basically got that head to the point where you could probably know if you knew which side the yield savers was, which is the right side, and the left side is not. So I think a lot of time we put yield savers on, and I ride in a lot of different combines with and without yield savers, and I sit on how much are we taking in without yield saver? In times, sometimes quite a bit. How much are we taking in with yield saver? At times quite a bit, sometimes not so much. But when we can hone things in, our success rate is very, very, very high. That's really what I had today. I certainly appreciate everybody being a part of this. I am very passionate about 360 yield saver. Throughout the fall, you're going to have fields that are going to shell. There are going to be certain heads that shell worse all the time. There are going to be certain heads that shell less all the time. Manufacturers have worked hard at that, but we still need to somewhat helmet that blow. Over a period of time across a lot of hybrids, we really see the benefit of being able to do that. But we want to be able to do that and manage residue. We want to manage wear. We want the grower to have a great experience. We want to minimize slowing the grower down at all, to be able to capture that additional $4 to $7 an acre at today's market. So with that, thank you very much for your support of 360 in general. Thank you for your interest in 360 Yield Saver. Have a great day.